Why not France? I think is the first question. So I would definitely say the very first thing is, and I love the question people often say, where do ideas come from? And I think of them sort of like an IKEA project where you have a whole bunch of odd parts and you're not entirely sure how they're going to come together, and you have maybe some visual ideas of where it's going, but the picture doesn't look like necessarily what you're creating. And the very start of this book was actually probably 22 years ago. I had the chance to take a vacation to France, and we went to the Champagne region. And in between a whole bunch of free, samples, we had a chance to tour the Veuve Clicquot Champagne House. And the tour guide, you know, boy, do I wish I had written her name down, but I had never done that, sort of started talking about the widow Clicquot and her story. And I wrote in my travel journal, um, she would make a wonderful character for a book, which is really fairly arrogant because I had never tried anything as large as a novel before. But I remember thinking she would be really intriguing. And she is just fast. I mean, how do you not like someone that, at that time, 1805, it's the Napoleonic Wars are still going on. She's in France. She's dealing with marauding Russian troops that come tramping through the vineyards. Her husband dies, quite possibly by suicide. There's some debate about the cause of his death. She has to pick up and start this business on her own. And the only reason she can even own a business in France at that time is because she is a widow. As a woman, she would not have been allowed otherwise to run and operate a business independently. So she had to smuggle her wines past military brigades. She hired pirates to basically smuggle the wine out and get it out to Russia. She was just this sort of incredible person. And so when I started thinking about writing a historical, I remembered her and I was like, how can I pull that in? One of my favorite compliments is someone who had a chance to do an early read said, "Where did you get these letters of hers?" And I was like, I made them up. That part was very easy. So I wanted to construct the story in two different parts. So half of the story is the widow Clicquot, Barbara Nicole, telling her own story. And she lived to 89, certainly at a time where people did not necessarily live that long. She had this amazing life full of lots of young lovers and pirates and, great success. And so I wanted her to sort of be reflecting back on when it was difficult. And so when things were starting. And so I came up with sort of the idea that she would be writing these letters of advice to her great granddaughter, great great granddaughter, actually. And so that became sort of the framework. And then I split the book. So the other half of the book is a present day storyline. And that tells the story of Natalie, who has sort of run away to France after a divorce. And she's attempting to sort of rebuild her life and figure it out, and failing fairly miserably at that endeavor to start. And she ends up finding a book of these letters. And so she begins to read the letters from the widow, and that sort of provides her with this realization, which I used to work as a therapist. I was a counselor for over 22 years. And one of the things that comes up quite often in the book is, and in fact, the opening letter from the widow is she says, "It matters what story you tell, and make sure you tell your own story." And I think it's so important. And again, as a therapist, one of the things that you learn very early on is it isn't what happens to people. You'll have people that will go through unbelievable traumatic events, death, dismemberment, all kinds of odd and awful things. But it's the story they tell themselves. So people who see, that was horrible. I'm not asking people to put a sunny spin on, I mentioned dismemberment, that would be one. You don't have to put a sunny spin on that. But people who are able to sort of see that and say, I overcame that, I am a survivor, that is more than who I am, are the people who tend to succeed. So it's nothing special. We sometimes look at people like the widow Clicquot and we say, how did that person ever do this amazing thing? But they're no different than anyone else. She just decided she was going to do it. And when things went wrong, and plenty goes wrong. Napoleon was certainly far more fond of Moet, who made Moet and Chardon, or eventually Dom Perignon. Um, so he preferred that champagne. There were all sorts of rules. Again, there was the war going on. But every time she got hit with a problem, she took it as a challenge. And that was really what I wanted the character in the present day to walk away with, was the idea that she was in charge of her own story. And so she had been sort of relying on her ex to sort of define, my ex left me, my life is over because of that. And I wanted her to shift that story and tell it in a different way. I found Barbara Nicole, the 18th century, or sorry, the 1800s character, fascinating. And so she was interesting for me to sort of drop into. The present day character, I do have some connection. So I ended up going through a divorce that I didn't see coming. We had already pre-planned our 25th wedding anniversary trip and to celebrate my 50th. And so I ended up going on that trip on my own. Um, and so I was wandering around France, much like the character Natalie. Now, I did not have a lot of the same adventures. I mostly, ate my body weight in cheese and sort of sniveled in a few art galleries as things were going on. But I remember thinking again, how would I like this story to go? And so the present day character was quite easy for me to sort of drop into because we had a lot that was similar. Now, it's not the same. She's a different person. They had a different marriage. I didn't want to write my own story. That's boring, to be honest. But it was easy for me to sort of drop into that. And I think there are a lot of people and women in particular who are sometimes having to reinvent themselves as they sort of enter their 50s. So for some, it's the shift that happens when the kids leave the house and they are suddenly not full-time momming. Sometimes it's divorce or a death of a spouse, but where you find yourself sort of at this crossroads with where you thought your future was going, what you thought your life was going to look like. I'm a little bit of a planner. It's a nice way of saying I have anxiety and I like to control everything. So I had very clear ideas of where life was going and what it was going to look like. And when everything sort of turned upside down, it's both incredibly freeing because you can remake your life in any new direction, and utterly terrifying because everything you thought that you knew is now a little bit different.